Hi, Sam Roberts here for ProRaster. Version 2.5.01 has some new user interface elements in it that allow you to access the GDAL virtual file system. So this is in all tiers of the product, so it's in ProRaster Essential, ProRaster Premium and ProRaster Scientific. So what you can do with this system is access rasters that are stored either up on the internet somewhere or in a compressed archive. So for example, if you have a raster that's in a zip file, you can read the raster directly out of the zip file without decompressing the zip file. Or if you have a raster that's on a FTP site or on some kind of cloud drive like Google Drive or Amazon S3, for example, AWS S3, then you can access rasters from those locations directly without having to download them. So let's look at how that mechanism works. So here's ProRaster Scientific. So firstly, I'm going to access a raster that's inside a zip file. So open the Open Algorithm menu button, drop it down, and you'll see these options for new algorithm, new contour algorithm, blah, blah. And if you go across, you'll see new algorithm for a raster archive or for a raster URL. So I'm going to select raster archive, and it comes up with this little dialog. If you use QGIS, you'll be sort of familiar with this kind of dialog. It's very similar in QGIS. So what you need to do is specify what kind of GDAL file system you're going to use, and then you specify the file path. So if you want to know all about these GDAL file systems, you need to go onto the internet and go to the GDAL website, and you'll find help there and the documentation. So if you're going to read a file out of a compressed archive, it supports zip, gzip, tar, 7-zip and rar. So we're going to use zip today. And you put in the file path. So I'll just copy that string from over here. There's no browser or anything. You just have to construct the path yourself and copy it in. So you can see the elements of this path. So it's on my C drive. There's the path to the zip file. Here's the zip file itself. It's zoraster.zip. And then you put in the name of the file that's inside the zip file that you want to extract. Now, a zip archive can also have internal folders, so there might be, some other folders like folder 1, folder 2, inside the zip. But in this case, I just have the files sitting at the root of the zip. And my file is z.ers. It's an ER mapper format raster file. So that's all I need to do. And you can see down here that it's constructed a final raster access string. And it's put this, and I'll just turn on edit so we can see that more clearly. It's put this little vizy zip / in front of the file name that I've provided. So that tells the GDAL driver that it needs to use the zip virtual file system in order to access this file. Now the reason you can edit this string is because it doesn't end just there. You can incorporate options into this string, so you can edit this thing directly and add in various options. And there are other concepts like chaining file systems together or nesting file systems that we don't support through the user interface, but we can support by allowing you to edit this string directly. Of course, then you need to be really familiar with the system and you need to read up on the documentation on the GDAL website. So let's just hit OK. And there we go, we've displayed the raster. Now, of course, to display rasters in ProRaster, you need not just the raster itself, you also need the overview pyramid. And in this case, I'll just bring up File Explorer. So we opened zoraster.zip, so let me open that. And you can see that it's got the header file, the z.ers, the z is just the data file, and then it's got a z.ers.ovr file. So that's the GDAL overview file. And in order to be able to render and work with rasters efficiently, we need that overview file. So if you're going to work with rasters that are in archives, the overview file should also be in the archive. If it isn't, well, then there'll be different behavior. So let's take a look at that. So if I go to a different zip file, so I go open, new algorithm for raster archive, and now I have a different zip file. This one doesn't have the overview in it, and I hit OK. You can see there's a little delay. It didn't open immediately this time. And the reason is because it didn't find the overview file. It had to create overviews. But that will occur outside of the GDAL system and in the ProRaster raster engine. And it created this overview file here separate to the zip file. So that may or may not be something that you want to happen. So you need to be aware of that possibility. So there's a mechanism for chaining and for nesting. So if you had a zip file that was inside another zip file and you wanted to access a raster that was inside that nested zip file, then you could nest your virtual file systems together to access that raster from the zip file On the other hand, if you had an archive, a zip file that was in the cloud, and you wanted to access that raster from the cloud and then from the archive, then you would chain your cloud virtual file system with your archive virtual file system to access that raster. So that's chaining and nesting. So let's look at URLs. So we'll go open, new algorithm for raster URL. And there's a bunch of options here. If you want assistance with this, again, you need to go to the GDAL website. So the main ones are this first one, HTTP, HTTPS, FTP. So this will give you access to ordinary FTP or internet stored rasters. And so let's do an example. So I've got one here. Cloud optimized GeoTIFF. This is imagery. So I've just pasted in the URL there, HTTPS blah blah blah, and down the bottom you can see your final access string has now got a VisiCurl directive in front of it. So that's using the curl derived virtual file system. So hit OK. This is some aerial imagery of Melbourne, and it comes from the Open Aerial Imagery website. And so there it is. And if you zoom in, it will. Whoops! Oh, sorry. Got ballistic zoom on. Painful. And if you zoom in, then it will go back to that URL and acquire data from different levels of the pyramid. So when you're working with rasters that are in the cloud, those rasters need to be able to provide the overview pyramids. In other words, they need to be embedded in the raster itself. So you're looking at basically cloud optimized GeoTIFFs. I mean, there's not much else. So that's really what this mechanism is for. If it's some other kind of raster that doesn't have a overview pyramid embedded in it, well, then that's not really going to work very well, and you're better off just downloading the raster. So that's some imagery. Let's try a different one. This time I'm going to go to AWS S3, and I'm going to download some Landsat data. So as you might be aware, all of the Landsat data and Sentinel data is all continuously uploaded to AWS, and it's all available in a bucket there, and you can download it. and it's in a requester pays bucket, so it's not free. You need to pay to access this data. Of course, there is a monthly download limit, which is free, and that's what I'm working with. So you select the AWS S3 virtual file system and put in the name of this TIFF. Again, it's a cloud optimized GeoTIFF, and this URL this time is going to contain the S3 bucket name, which is the first thing, and then the I think what they call it, the key, and that's the sort of the path with the file name at the end, and it's a cloud optimized GeoTIFF. And down here it says it's using Visi S3, so that's the virtual file system. Hit OK, and that will load. Now, the reason it loads is because I've specified my credentials. For Amazon S3, if you're loading something from a bucket that requires payment, then you have to have your credentials defined. And I've defined mine by placing them into the GDAL configuration file, which is in your username. It's on your C drive under your username in a special directory. So if you look in the ProRaster user guide, you'll find some guidance on that. And I found that was the only way to specify the credentials. There are multiple mechanisms, but I couldn't get any of the others to work. But putting the credentials into that GDAL configuration file did work, and allowed me to access this file from S3. So this is just a Landsat scene, one particular band. It's probably band 1, and again, as you zoom in, then it's going to go back to that file and acquire new data and render it in real time. So that's the system that you can use to take advantage of what is really a very powerful system in GDAL, which is the virtual file system. There are other ways to access it. For example, you can create a raster source, and you can put those, VisiCurl or VisiZip or VisiS3 or whatever it is, file directives into the file name itself. And you can find some information on how to do that in, again, the ProRaster user guide. And just a final note on this is that just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should. So there can be issues. Firstly, not all raster formats are going to be supported, especially coming from the cloud. There's only a very small number of raster formats that effectively can be supported. But even coming out of archives, not all raster formats are supported, so that's one issue. Secondly, you might find that the performance coming out of an archive, for example, is shockingly bad. It may be very, very slow, and that might be a problem. And also coming from the internet, you might find that's not particularly good either in terms of performance. So before you use this mechanism, just think carefully and say, well, shall I just decompress the archive instead? 999 times out of 1,000, that will be a better solution, but there are scenarios where that might not be a good solution. And also, if you're accessing data on the web, you may just want to just download the data first, and that may be a better solution a lot of the time as well. Of course, it's not always possible. So that's the new user interface elements that provide access to those features in GDAL in ProRaster Scientific, ProRaster Premium and Essential version 2.5.01.